Hello, and I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us this evening for this screening of the critically acclaimed and newly released documentary entitled 1948, Creation and Catastrophe. I'm Judith Tucker. I'm a professor of history here at Georgetown and also a member of the core faculty at the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. And it's really a pleasure for me to be here tonight and to have all of you here. Many of your faces are familiar. So this movie was 10 years in the making, actually, and it tells the story of the establishment of Israel as seen through the eyes of the people who lived it. But rather than being a history lesson, or rather than being only a history lesson, it is also a primer for the present. It's simply not possible to make sense of what is happening in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict today without an understanding and a deep understanding of 1948. And this documentary is actually the last chance, in a way, to hear first-hand accounts of what took place in Haifa, Jaffa, Deir Yassin, Acre, Jerusalem, Ramleh, Lydda, from the Israelis and Palestinians who personally fought in and fled from this land. So what we're going to see is shocking and dramatic events that reveal the core of what drives the conflict today. And we're also very, very fortunate and honored, indeed, to have with us co-directors, Dr. Ahlam Mutaseb and Andy Trimlett, who will discuss the laborious process of producing and completing this movie later tonight. Dr. Mutaseb is a professor of media studies at California State University, San Bernardino, and her research interests include digital communication, social media, and diasporic communities. And she has published her scholarship on digital communication and other communication subtopics, and has presented her scholarship to national and international conventions and scholarly meetings. Her most recent project is the documentary we just saw, 1948, Creation and Catastrophe. In addition, most of her recent research focuses on digital media and social movements online, that is cyber activism, as well as Arab and Muslim images in the media. Andy Trimlett has a master's degree in Middle East Studies from the University of Washington and a bachelor's degree in International Security and Conflict Resolution from San Diego State University. Andy has a decade of experience in public television, having served as senior producer, associate producer, editor, and camera operator on a wide range of productions. He has worked on PBS programs in the United States, Hungary, and Austria, winning a regional Emmy for a 30-minute documentary he co-produced about property tax law in California. So, what we want to do is give each of them about 10 minutes to discuss the filmmaking process, after which we'll open the floor to questions. Thank you.
No, let's do it together. Just take questions.
Sure. Yeah.
Hello. Well, thank you so much for inviting us. I would like to thank Azza in particular for all the hard work she did to make this happen, and the Walsh School of Foreign Services and the Arab Contemporary Studies Center. I know I did not say that right. What do you want to say, Andy? Should we take questions?
Sure. Let's go straight to questions, and we'll probably we usually answer questions with very long answers. So.
Yeah, and you have been listening for a long time, so it's time to hear from you also.
Hi, my name is Samar. I'm a student at the Mass program. I'm originally Palestinian, so it was really hard to watch this documentary. And my question is about the process of making the film. What motivated you to do another documentary in 1948, but also most importantly, interviewing these Israeli soldiers that were involved in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, but also hearing some of dismissive or I'm not sure how to articulate myself, but in a way, like addressing the atrocity, but then saying, you know, that we had to do what we had to do to, and then the process of interviewing the Palestinians, where these people living in refugee camps or abroad, and just some of the challenges of you being engaged in this project. Thanks.
Okay, we'll divide this, I guess. So how did we, the idea of the film, how it started, for me, it started from my oral histories project in the Palestinian refugees. And I started working like on the field work in 2006. Although the idea was earlier before, you know, in my mind, you know, as a scholar, as a researcher, I wanted to do it for a few years, and then in 2006 I got some grants from a university, and I started actually, and I bought filming equipment, and I went to Lebanon. I started in Syria first, then went to Lebanon, and then Israel invaded Lebanon only a few days after I started, so I had to stop. And I was stranded in Palestine for 35 days. I could not go back to Lebanon, so I gave up and I went back to the States. 2007, I met Andy at an anti-war rally, and we talked briefly, you know, about what I was doing, and you know, he started actually doing films at that time. And in 2008, I wanted to go back and continue my research and my scholarship, and I had an idea as a social justice scholar to like engage my participants in the research, and one way was like, how could I give back to them is to kind of give them voice, because they wanted their stories to be heard by the world. So I was thinking of doing a small scale, like video, like educational one that could be used in classes, different types of classes about those narratives. And that's what I had in mind before going. And then Andy contacted me and said, I think we should do a joint film, larger one, not as large as it ended up. So we joined forces. I'll let him talk about why he wanted to do the film, and then we can talk about some of the interesting stories about interviewing our participants or refugees, Israelis, etc.
So I got into this because I got my master's degree in Middle East Studies, and after finishing my degree, I knew the facts, I knew the moments in history, I knew what you were supposed to read in the books, but I didn't understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I didn't get it. I could tell you all sorts of information about it, but I didn't understand the core of it until after I graduated and started researching 1948. And that's when it all clicked. Even stuff that's going on today with the checkpoints and the home demolitions, every single thing, it all fell into place and I understood it. And I realized that if I had gone through 2 years of graduate school and still didn't fully make sense of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, how could like a regular person on the street ever make sense of it? Just by reading the news today, which is usually somebody bombed this place or somebody was killed here. And so I decided there needed to be a documentary about this, and we joined forces. At the time I said, this is the biggest project I've ever worked on in my life. It's not going to be done until late next year. And that was 10 years ago. But we managed to get it done. We traveled to 7 different countries, Palestine, Israel, the Jordan, Lebanon, the UK. We did an interview in Canada, and we did several interviews in the US. And then there was a whole lot of translation that went on. We did about 20,000 pages of research. As you saw, we interviewed some of the most well-known historians on the conflict from a range of viewpoints. And then took all of that, about 90 interviews in all, and crushed it down into a 85-minute documentary. So I'll tell the whole story about interviewing the Israelis. So I did all the interviews with the Israelis, and I'll tell you, it was really hard to get people to talk. I worked with some Israelis who were really interested in the project, and they called people all over, because everybody's got like a grandpa or like, cousins, whoever, relative, and then they're also kind of well-known people, and over and over again, they got the answer, we don't talk about this. This is not something we talk about. And so it was really hard to find people. But really, I mean, there was no secret to it other than just persistence. It's like just over and over again they called, and finally people, here and there started to say yes. And then I also reached out myself to some of the more well-known Israeli veterans, like Mordechai Bar-On, who's a historian, and then Mordechai Gechon. Actually, that's an interesting story. We'll tell that one a little bit. But then people would say like Yoram Kanyuk was like, I emailed him and he got back to me and said, I'll do an interview if you read my book. So I went and read his book. And there was another guy, I'll do my interview if you read my book. So I read his book. But then I went there and really my approach was to just ask a question and let them talk. And I think there are a lot of people who've done, I mean, this isn't the first documentary about 48, but there's a lot of people who've done interviews with Israelis, and some of the people I interviewed told me about this, where they said, the interview would just kind of jump down their throat and say, how dare you do this? And I really just let them talk. I wanted to hear what they had to say. I wanted to hear how they understood it in their head. And I think we got some really powerful moments that kind of reveal how they think about it, and also reveal kind of, what really went on. You want to talk about that,
Well, obviously I did not do the interviews with the Israelis, and they did it, and probably that's why we succeeded in getting some, although as you said, it was very, very hard to even get those few. With Palestinians, it wasn't as hard, although some people still didn't want to talk about, the Nakba or 1948, no matter what. So there were people who actually turned down my request for interviews. They wanted to chat with me, but not to do an interview, with a camera and all of that. And there were, I think, as I said, thinking about social justice perspective, doing research, you try to blend in the culture, and you have to be an insider and all of that to gain the trust of people. And at the beginning, I was very naive. I thought, well, I'm Palestinian. I'm not a refugee, but I'm originally Palestinian. So all I have to do is just go there. I speak Arabic fluently. It's my native language. And that's a wrong assumption. You really have to build trust. You really have to go eat with people, have food. They look at you as an outsider, even if you were Palestinian. For them, I was American Palestinian, which is different than being a refugee from the camp. So I really worked on that. But then, a lot of them wanted to talk. They were so frustrated. They wanted people to hear their stories. That's where the whole idea of me doing a film came from, right? And they felt like there was nothing left for them except to tell their stories. That's when I worked in the refugee camps. But there were a lot of interesting stories that we uncovered outside of the norm, in places where you don't expect you would find people to talk about 1948. And I will mention probably briefly a couple of stories. But I wanted to say, I actually had something to say, I forgot. But, the reason why it took forever really to finish this documentary is you keep digging, and the more you dig, you find more, and it drags. And then you think, we have really to cover this. And then you think, we don't have enough research materials on this, so let's go and find more materials. Let's find a survivor from this town because we actually did not cover that. And that's what really, took us all that time. So one of the interesting stories that pushed us back and in post-production, we were in post-production and pushed us back actually to production, was the story of Deir Yassin that you saw, and I saw some of the people in the back were very emotional. It's very emotional, it's very hard. I could tell you also about how hard it was for me to sit down with refugees and listen to those stories. But that's a very interesting story because we actually reached a point, Andy and I, at the beginning of 2014 where we said, that's it, we're done. We did a fundraiser and wanted to just finish the film and all of that. We both swore we will not go back and do any more stories or filming, etc. But it was in the summer of 2014 when the war started. I kept on going to the demonstrations in San Diego and in LA. And every time I went to the demo in San Diego, there was an old man with his wife. He would always bring his wife. They were ailing. I mean, you could tell they were in bad health. But he insisted on coming and bringing her, and obviously she was in much worse health than him. And they intrigued, my interest. So at the last demo, I said, well, I have to go and talk to him. I was very, very intrigued. So I went and I said, hi, my name is Ahlam, and where are you from, Ammo, And he said, I'm from Deir Yassin. I was like, Deir Yassin? The Deir Yassin. And he was like, yes. I said, well, did you live in Deir Yassin in 1940? Were you there when the massacre happened? And he said, yes, I was 8 years old. And I was like, and his name was Aziz Aqil. It's not the man we see in the documentary, actually, it's his brother. And I said, do you remember? He said, yes, of course I remember everything. And I said, we are doing this film, would you? And I knew he would kill me if I told him. I was like, how am I gonna tell him? He's gonna be very angry at me. But I had the courage to tell him, and then he agreed. Because we were looking for survivors from Deir Yassin, and we couldn't find anyone. And then I find someone in San Diego, where I literally live, both of us. I mean, I live northeast of San Diego. Anyway, so then he said, but probably you should talk to my brother. I was like, you have a brother? And he said, yes. He wrote 3 books, one of them on Deir Yassin, and he was 11 years old and remembers better than I do. I was like, where is he? He said, in Escondido, which is northeast of San Diego. I was like, oh my God, we have those 2 survivors. So I went back to Andy and I convinced him, and he did not kill me. And we actually took half a day, 3-4 hours probably it took, and we went and interviewed him, and he shared with us a lot of information. He had maps of the village. He had, of course, his book. He had pictures, everything. It was a wealth. Now that story set us back, as I said, 8 months to fact check, and we were very, very meticulous because his story was very unique, and it was not the typical story of Deir Yassin that you could find in books and archives. So I think I called him at least 3 or 4 times after, and I would go over certain parts of the story or say, so now Ammo, could you please tell me this part again, how it happened, to make sure that the story is consistent. And at one point, actually, he was a little bit nervous, upset with me, frustrated, I already told you of that. He thought probably that I had some dementia issues or something, because I kept on calling him. I would call survivors from, for example, Dahoud Aqil, one of his actual relatives from New Jersey. We find few, actually, in the United States. We learned a lot about Deir Yassin after actually doing that. Then we talked to scholars and researchers like Matt Hogan here, and who wrote a book, and we talked to other scholars. I translated a book written by Sharif Kanane in Beirut, a Palestinian scholar of Deir Yassin. So we kept on compiling information. Then Andy is going to tell you now the story of Gihon, Mordechai Gihon, who talked about Deir Yassin, how we actually also added him.
I told you we give long answers.
Yeah, that's why we said, let's just start with the questions.
First of all, I do want to give a bigger recognition to Matt Hogan, because he was a huge help in this project. I think he knows more about Deir Yassin than anyone in the world. So if you want to know about Deir Yassin, talk to Matt. Thank you.
Wasn't about to
But so imagine this: there were 800 people living in Deir Yassin in 1948. 110 of them were killed in the massacre, and then, it was a long time ago, a lot of them died just from old age, and there weren't a lot left in the world, and we just stumbled upon one, who lived 40 minutes from our house in California. Are you kidding me? So his story was so powerful and so emotional that we felt like we couldn't just have him in it. We had to find an Israeli who was there. So I put together a list of 3 Israelis who I knew were there and were still alive. And I worked with an Israeli producer, and she started calling them. And the first one, it turned out, had some health issues, and he was just no longer able to talk and give an interview. The second one, he said, I already wrote a book about this, just read my book, I'm never going to talk to anyone again. Okay, that's not going to work for a documentary. And the third one said yes, and that was Mordechai Gihon, who was a Haganah intelligence officer responsible for the area around Deir Yassin. And I thought he gave him an amazing interview, and at the end of the interview he told the producer, you are welcome back at any time, but not for an interview. So
He didn't even finish it.
he did, but he wasn't very excited about it. But we got that and then compiled this together and worked with Matt and did a massive amount of research, and we were able to tell that story. So, with all that said, question number 2. Yeah.
I actually have very many questions, so I'll throw them at you and then you can decide how to answer
Give us a
them.
break, it's okay.
One is, how did you get the funding, and then where to now? And the other one was, Andy, were you Jewish, and if so, did that make it easier to talk to the Israelis? Did they accept you more easily? And did you look at interviewing any Israelis who left and came back because they couldn't live with it anymore?
Yeah, let's do it backwards, because we're not talking about the funding.
Okay, sure. One of the Israelis in the documentary did leave, and he was no longer, he left shortly after 1948. And it's Yosef ben Eleazar, who's the guy, he was in the Ramla and Linda segment, and was talking about how they were doing the same thing to us. I actually interviewed him in Jerusalem, because he was there for a conference, but he lived in England. He died a few years ago. So we got one of those. We didn't really go into the story. There's so many. We have so many stories that we just couldn't fit into this. And that was really the hardest part about this entire project, was deciding what not to put in. The original edit I did was 2.5 hours long. I'm not gonna lie, it was painful to watch, but figuring out what not to tell was the hardest part. And then as far as yes, I'm not Jewish at all. I'm a Eurotrash nut. Basically, pick a country in Europe, and I'm from there. But really, what helped me was I played the dumb white guy from California. It helped immensely. And I just smiled, and there were so many times where I thought, oh no, what's going to happen? Like, for example, on my second trip, the first trip I flew straight in to Tel Aviv, and the second trip I had some interviews to do in Jordan, so I flew into Amman, and then went across through the West Bank all the way to Jaffa. It was a very long trip. And then I was on the way out, and I had all my tapes of every interview I did with every Israeli. And I was like, I really don't want these to be confiscated. So I had made copies of them. There were separate hard drives I left with a guy in the West Bank, his cousin. And so I was very careful. And then we get to, it was a Saturday, so there's nobody on, it was like literally just me on the bus. And we get there, and I hand my passport over, and like, here it is, and it's this like 18-year-old Israeli girl, and she's like, looks at it, and she's like, oh, you're from California? And I'm like, yeah, California. And she's like, okay. And that was like, that was the whole interrogation. So, yeah, it helped a lot. But, and also just, I think being open to hearing their stories helped a lot too. I really tried to just, I would ask a question and I would just let them talk, and a lot of these people really wanted to talk. There was one who, it was my first interview with an Israeli veteran, and he danced around the story like you wouldn't believe. He was Haganah intelligence, and I was like, he's either senile or he's using some hardcore intelligence, dodging tactics, and I'm like, I really hope everybody else isn't like this. But after that, everybody was pretty darn open with me, and they had different opinions on what took place, but they kind of told me what they saw and what they did. Anyone do funding?
Yes. The funding was very, very problematic for us. It was very frustrating because the beginning for my field work actually was funded by my school, California State University. I got grants, over a few years, and mainly a great actually part of funding came from Cal State money. But we applied for big grants left and right, including NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities. We applied for Sundance. We applied for the Heart Foundation, everywhere, and we got rejections right and left. Although my record at my school and other, outside of my school, in terms of grant funding, is 100% success. But for that particular project, it was zero success, except for my school, because obviously it was not a very popular topic, and we could tell from the feedback, you don't always get feedback. For example, Sundance wouldn't give you feedback. They receive like thousands of applications, so they just tell you, sorry, we couldn't fund you, blah, blah, blah. But NEH, we got actually feedback twice, and you could tell from the feedback things like, we used like, what was the word for Benny Morris? They used a very funny word to describe Benny Morris. Like he was pro-Palestinian. That's Benny Morris, who was like the most conservative.
Yeah, they wanted us to use, they recommended specifically the historian Ephraim Karsh, if anyone knows who he is.
Who is the most Zionist, and a lot of, actually, the information he gives is not even accurate. So we received those kinds of feedback, so we concluded that obviously it's the film, the topic, although we really told them it would be new, there is nothing called new, but like fair. We will interview Israelis, Palestinians, historians, etc. And we tried really to have a very objective, like scientific, scholarly method, all of that. It did not get us anywhere. So we ended up at the very end when we had to pay for all the images, so those are very expensive. The images and archival images and videos. We reached a point where we had to do Kickstarter campaign in 2014. And it's like crowdfunding, basically. You let the community, basically help. So that's a community effort, really. I mean, we are very grateful to all the people from different walks of life. Some people actually donated to us without really, they thought it was an interesting project and they felt we had a lot of passion for it and supported us. And then we did other fundraisers. We got 2 grants later, only this year and the end of last year, 2 grants from the Jerusalem Fund, and now we have some private also investor. One of the executive producers also chipped in some money. So it was really, really very hard labor just to do the fundraising, but we managed. So a lot of it is really our hard labor. Because if you quantify our work over 10 years, don't try to do it. We really took part of our lives really, and we are grateful to our families for really being patient. My husband and my son and his wife and 2 kids. So we finished. Sorry, it was a long answer.
Where to now?
Oh, where to? Just invite us everywhere you could. This is our LLC, Limited Liability Corporation, functions as a non-profit, so we can't make any profit out of the film, but we really, really want everyone to be able to see it, as many people as we could. And we want to go outside of the typical audience. We want really to reach average Americans. We have a plan for distribution, and chip in whenever you want.
We have the film screening. We do have more, if you want to be a little more specific, we have film screenings coming up in New York on...
So tomorrow I'm going to be in New York at Hunter College. Then I fly immediately the following day to Tennessee. We have a screening in Tennessee at Rhodes College, and partial screening talk at the University of Memphis in Tennessee. And then we have the Boston Film Festival on the 23rd. We have a screening also in Boston. Then we have San Diego Arab Film Festival screening. It's going to be on the 29th of October. Then in November we have a lineup also, including, this is as a scholar, I'm very proud of that, MESA, the Middle Eastern Studies Association. Yeah, they in their film festival, they are going to actually screen our film, so I'm excited about that. Then we have invitations left and right, to the extent we couldn't really follow up, so we hired someone to take care of that very recently, only 3 days ago, to take care of all the requests. We are receiving requests from around the world, literally from Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, Paris, London. We screened twice actually in London in August and
In Texas.
in Texas country, Italy, Milan Art Festival. They want to do a screening in March. It's really beyond now even my memory to remember all the countries and the places.
But how about PBS or Texas?
Aha, okay, you talk about that.
Funny you mentioned that, that's my day job. I work at the PBS station in LA.
Oh, wow.
And I was, in fact, about 2 hours ago at PBS headquarters at a meeting. That's why I was able to arrange this. So, yeah, I've spent the last 10 years working in the PBS world. That's that's kind of the next step, is to submit it to various, and there's various distribution options with PBS, so we don't have a deal on anything yet. It's very, very difficult, no matter what your topic is, to get distribution by PBS. But there are some alternative ways to get on PBS stations because they're all programmed locally and independently. So that's the next step. Is we're going to start really pushing that. So well, stay tuned.
Well, I am so impressed. I recognize when you sort of did your initial funding, it was several years ago, and this is the dedication that you had to this really shines through. It is well done, it is well sourced, and so it was powerfully learning. My question is so tiny. Why do I remain puzzled about why we say Arab and why we say Jew? I just don't think those are the best descriptors of the of the people. So why do we say that?
Okay. So that's a good question, and we
We
wrestled
went
with
through
that.
a lot.
We wrestled with that a lot, and what we ended up going the decision we came down with, let's call them what they called themselves at the time. And so before 1948, everybody in Palestine called themselves Palestinians. Both the Jews and the Arabs called themselves Palestinians because they lived in Palestine. And so if we just called them if we just called them Palestinians, then everybody would be confused. So most specifically what they called themselves, and this is how this is reflected in history books, is they called themselves Arabs and Jews to distinguish the communities. And then after the establishment of the state, we refer to them as Israelis and Palestinians. And that's partially to educate people who don't know much about this conflict, what's the difference between Arabs and Jews and Israelis and Palestinians? Because people like my mom don't know, and they want to know the relationship, how is an Israeli compared, what's the difference between a Jew and an Arab and a Palestinian? And so we kind of wanted to build that in to the story so that you kind of understand where the names came from. There are a lot of other options, and we've heard them all, trust me. But that was what we decided to go with, which was that's most commonly used in all the history books that I've read.
I know it's most commonly used, but that's my issue. It's just not totally accurate. And that's why I wondered.
But why would you say it's not accurate? Actually, we meant to include a segment, although it was very brief, we had to cut it, on differentiating between European colonizers, the Jewish European colonizers, how they came and what agenda they had as an extension of the European colonization of the whole region, and the Palestinian Jews who lived there.
Well, you made that point.
Yes, so so it, again, as Andy said,
It's complex.
it gets very confusing, and
You said this was a tiny question.
and we had a lot of debate, and we tried several things, and also the issue of conflict. Many people don't like the word conflict because conflict could actually indicate something like two equal parties. But if you experiment with other terms, you get people confused. Remember, the way we did the testing, we did testing of the film, we sent it to several people, some educated on the conflict, some not, average people. And I did one with my students, my grad students, and I also did it with my colleagues, faculty from my department, and most of them know very little. I mean, they have some sympathy, for the refugees, stuff like that, but they don't really know anything about the history itself. And based actually on, and we gave them, a tool, a survey to write, and we collected their actual written feedback, and we amended a lot of things based on that. They were very confused about who were Israelis, who were Palestinians, who were Jewish, so believe me, it went through a huge process of thinking, and we had to come to the decision-making process. I don't know what else to tell you, but that was the best we could come up with.
I certainly trust I trust your ultimate decision, but thank you.
It's a good question.
It is. We are on the same page.
We wrestled with it.
we had, yeah.
I think we have about 9 minutes left, so, yes.
Is it okay if I make a comment?
Yeah.
Sure. I have one small question. One small question, really small.
That's what she said.
And there was something you mentioned, like I've heard many narratives about, about expulsion. There was something you said about they made land deals from wealthy landowners who were not
living
there. What was that about? I was very curious about that.
Yeah, I caught that too.
So, it has to do with kind of 19th century Ottoman law. It's a topic that you can go on for about 20 minutes about, but essentially, because of how the Ottoman Empire shook down, a whole lot of very rich Lebanese owned a lot of land in Palestine, and the Palestinians who lived on that land they lived there, and their parents and grandparents, etc., had lived there, but they didn't actually have the deed to the land, and so the Lebanese landowners basically sold it out from under them.
Can I add
That's the short
something?
version.
Yeah, I'll add something.
And Lebanese.
Well, not only few. Actually, there were some cases, not always, some cases where those actually rich Lebanese or Syrian, some of them were Syrian, they actually came to the villagers who worked the land and offered them for very cheap to buy the land and register it under their name. But because one reason why many Palestinians didn't do it is out of fear during the Ottoman Empire rule, to be drafted into the war, which was horrible because most of them disappeared when they were drafted. They were sent to Caucasia or to Europe or somewhere, and they never came back. So many of the villagers refused to even do that out of fear. And then that process, continued, and during the British, the Zionists came and bought all these lands because, those rich people were not very engaged with the villagers. So,
We
to add
have
to that.
one more question?
No, I have a comment.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, that was the question.
Yeah, that was the question. I mean, you took your time. So, not my fault. I have to say I was so intrigued by the nuanced, like the Israeli, like the position, like some of them, not all of them, but some of them, to me were so interesting because my sense is that their positions had a lot of complexity because they were coming from suffering themselves, kind of, and so that they could actually empathize or have compassion for the Palestinians at the same time. And it's something that's very unique, I think, because my sense is that a lot of American Jews, for example, don't have that sensibility. Whereas those people, because they actually were in the trenches, had a different, I don't know, it was very refreshing in a way. I know it was very hard, and it just showed me kind of the cyclical nature of violence, kind of what happened to them, and then how they ended up doing the same, and and in the end, the question is then what do we do now? But yeah, so that was fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think
She
right,
has a
right to your left, yeah, or right, I guess that is.
You mentioned earlier that you kind of had to cut down the documentary from 2.5 hours to what we just saw. I wonder if you would think it's worthwhile to perhaps consider publishing in the form of writing the rest of the stories that you did. I know that's more work and you've already done so much, that's fantastic. But I just feel that what you've gathered is so valuable, and personally, and I'm sure a lot of other people would be really curious to hear about other stories.
No, you are absolutely right, and actually that's my baby, you know, that's my original project, and hopefully once we're done with the film, we keep on saying done, but every time there is a new stage, you know, I want to write my book, and Andy knows about this project. The book is, of course, focuses on cognitive narratology and other like scholarly things, but hopefully I will collect as many of those narratives in that book. We have a total of 90 interviews that we did in those 7 countries, but I also have interviews that are already transcribed from my trip in 2006 in Beirut mainly, and in Damascus in Syria in the refugee camps. So I probably have 12 more of those interviews, earlier interviews. We did not use them because I did not use high definition filming at that time. It was new technology. So unfortunately, the video quality is not compatible with what we have now. But we also want the visual documentation to be conserved and to be shared with other people, with other scholars who want to do research, or just average people. So now we started the process of cleaning up. We did the first 20 interviews.
I think about it, I can't remember exactly.
Did you say 20? No. Well, it's either
A number of interviews.
a number. It's between 12 and 20, let's say. We hired someone actually who's like a professional editor who would go through the interviews, each one, and clean up all the me talking, Andy talking, walking around, or anything that is not related to the content of the interview, and put the subtitles where they belong. He's bilingual, and upload them to the internet, to our website, 1948movie.com. If you wanna,
They're not there yet.
they are not there yet, but he finished the first wave, and we are gonna start upload them very soon. Also, please, everyone here, you have to like us on our Facebook page, because we put a lot of those updates, and sometimes we put even clips, and we put all the screenings, so you can keep it. But that's an excellent question. Of course, we are not gonna lose any of them. And at one point, we hope to actually ask people to upload their own stories, or their grandfather stories, or grandmother stories, etc.
Can I also say, I really hope you do accept the invitation to Kuwait. I'm Kuwaiti Palestinian. My grandmother had to leave Jerusalem in '48, and they then had to leave Kuwait again in 1990. They were basically displaced twice. So I think it's very important, especially for the Gulf, to remember the suffering that Palestinians had to endure again.
Yeah, we have 3 requests so far in that region. So.
We've kind of run out of time, so maybe we could you could chat with them afterwards, but it's a very, very quick comment.
It's really a tiny comment.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to know whether you are aware about the project for the oral history project.
Palestine, remember?
Palestine, not Palestine, remember, at AUB in Beirut, at the American University. It's called POHA, Palestine Oral History Archive. And it's a new project, and you might want to
team with them.
Yes.
Somebody actually mentioned before.
There's Kaukab Shbaro as one of the people in the project.
I'll talk to you.
And Hannah Sleiman. Yeah.
But somebody mentioned it before, I remember.